So I mentioned in the piece notes that I have passed over this scripture every 3 years when it's come up now for like 12 times, So the older you get, the more you think, okay, it's now or never, right? And I've tried to pick up some new works on Luke's gospel, like from, Reading with Earth, Contributions of the New Materialism to an Ecological Feminist Hermeneutics, which, if you need something to help you sleep, there you go, right? But there are a lot of newer scholars, both of these are Australian, who are looking at the gospel and what it says to us about the kind of present climate crisis. So trying to look and trying to find a fresh word. And always when we come to the scripture, the question, of course, is kind of like, what is in here for us, right? Like what speaks to us? And the challenge of that, of course, is when you come to like Luke's gospel, to be honest, you have to be clear that there's the world in which Luke, the gospel writer, wrote, which would have been some 60, 70 years after the time of Jesus' earthly ministry, around the hundreds. And then there's the world behind him, right? All that he's inherited. And then there's the world in front of him. And we have the same world, right? We come here, we have all of our history, all of this stuff. We have the world we live in, and we have the world we look at. And those are different worlds, right? So we have to try to figure out, where does this intersect? And then there are always some obvious differences, like the world of Luke presumed slavery. And while there's, some kind of, scholars will try to well, it wasn't really like slavery like we think of slavery. It's like, well, this guy's getting cut in two, So there's kind of sometimes an inability to look at the cruelty in the text, which doesn't really get us very far down the road. And then there's also just the reality that the first people who engaged with the scripture would not have been readers, but they would have been listeners, or what scholars sometimes call auditors, right? They would have heard these stories, which is why a lot of times I'll mention the Hebrew repeats this or the Greek repeats this, because when things are repeated, like sometimes there's a rhythm to it that we miss, but also it's like there's a reason it's repeated, right? So there's kind of an invitation here to try to step back and keep asking what is in this passage for us. So it's part of it is a little familiar to it. Jesus is speaking. It's in Luke's chapter 12. Things are getting more contentious. He's kind of speaking to that. And he's saying, do you think that I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. From now on, 5 in one household will be divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3, they will be divided. Father against son, son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And then Jesus also said to the crowds, and this is kind of, for me, the center of this piece today, when you see a cloud rising in the west, you immediately say, it is going to rain, and so it happens. And when you see the south wind blowing, you say, there will be scorching heat, and it happens. You hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky, but why do you not now know how to interpret the present time? So there we see this interest in interpreting and understanding what's going on. And then it kind of moves towards the debt structure of the day, which is in many ways still similar to our debt structure, right? That the poor get buried by fines and imprisonment. And why do you not judge for yourselves what is right? Or the Greek is more like, why do you not judge for yourselves what is just? Why do you not judge for yourselves what is just? Thus, when you go with your accuser before a magistrate, on the way, make an effort to settle the case, or you may be dragged before the judge, and the judge hand you over to the officer, and the officer throw you in prison. I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the very last penny.